Well, happy May, everybody. It's great to welcome you here at this time when we honor Mary as our mother. We have Mother's Day coming up. It's interesting. In Mexico, they always celebrate Mother's Day on the 10th of May, whereas in the United States and other parts of the world, it's usually the second Sunday of May. So it's one of those universal holidays that no matter when it is, it's embedded in the month of May. And it's such a great way to honor also the beautiful commandment of honoring our mother and father. And so hopefully during this month of May, you can bring flowers to Mary, you can crown her queen and mother of your home, and you can also venerate her through the praying of the rosary, or just tickle in the beads every once in a while, letting her know how much you really care for her. And so I just thought we'd start with a little reflection from May 3rd, from a book that my mom truly loves called Focus Your Day. And so we begin in prayer in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Before you retire, take time to recall how God touched your life during this particular day. Perhaps he revealed himself in a friend's love, in something beautiful that you saw, or in a quiet experience of his own personal presence within you. In the rush of our activities, it is easy to forget the many touches of God's hand throughout the day. Recalling the touches of his presence reminds us of his love, sharpens our awareness of his gifts, and deepens our gratitude for his faithfulness. And so we ask our Mother Mary to allow us to receive those gentle touches of God throughout our day, and especially today, in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, I can't think of a better guest, a better person to bring on during the month of May than my mommy, and it is exciting to have her on the program. She is somebody who has inspired me to be a priest, to be, as I hope, somebody who can be as caring and loving in my relationship with Jesus and with others. And there's no doubt that one of the hardest parts of being a mom is that she has to share me with 7 other kids. So I really feel bad for her of having to do that. I promised that I would never ask her the question of why I am her favorite son. So I will not ask that question either. Mm-hmm. But I definitely want to dive into the great conversation with her. Mom, welcome to the program. Happy beloved Mother's Day, a couple days early.
Thank you.
Just had a quick question for you, though. Of all the places where you have visited Mary, maybe a Marian statue, Marian shrines around the world, the different images of Mary, you grew up in St. Bede's, you've been to Mexico City, I think you've been to Rome, and you have all these places where you've visited statues or images or places where Mary was. Do you have a favorite place or a place where you had a deeper experience of Mary?
Our first trip to Rome, when we went into St. Peter's, you walk in and to the right is the Pieta. That is so moving because that encapsulates motherhood in that you have to be ready to enjoy, but also to deal with the sorrows of being a mother. And so to be able to align the emotions to Mary, because she certainly went the gamut on all the emotions of raising a child. To me, that gives great strength to see her. And I recently learned that her arms are open. She's giving us her son. And that is a very powerful message for all of us to know that, our children are meant to be given to the Lord. He is the ultimate father. And she gives us that example.
Yeah, it's interesting when you walk into there as well, that it's made to be above an altar. So it's not only is she giving her son to the world, she's giving them specifically to a priest who would be celebrating the Eucharist as he's looking at that. And it's as if Mary, her hands would actually hold the Eucharist with the priest when he holds it up. And what a special place that is for a priest to be able to feel Mary's embrace as he's celebrating the Mass. But the Pietà is definitely one of the great places to go.
Moving.
It is. Now, you grew up in Point Breeze. Describe Point Breeze for somebody who has never been to Point Breeze.
It's a very closed community. And generally speaking, when I was growing up, everybody knew everybody. I mean, you had a very open policy of being able to go in and out of people's homes.
So it wouldn't be like COVID quarantine time with mask wearing or anything like that.
I'll never forget when I was the youngest of 5 and shuffling us off to the dentist or whatever. kids came into our house all the time. And it wasn't until we came home from that appointment that Mother realized that one of our neighbor's children was downstairs the entire time in the game room, playing down there, and discovered that was one child still left behind, so to speak. Yeah, so it was very freeing, and there were almost 50-some kids on Rosewood Street at that time when we were growing up.
So what was the name of your street? Rosewood?
Rosewood Street.
And where is Point Breeze, if you've never been to Pittsburgh? What area is that?
The East End, and it's sandwiched between like Squirrel Hill and East Liberty and Homewood, and it's just it's a great little community. And St. Bede's was the parish that I grew up in, and it's so beautiful because I have a granddaughter who's going to preschool there, and to take her to school and to be able to tell her, that was my first grade room down there. Things haven't changed much, and so it's still a great family community. And
you're also able to like walk there too, right? Or did you have to take a school bus to?
Oh no, that was the other great thing.
Yeah,
is that in those days we walked home for lunch. So it was a beautiful thing. We'd be walking in the door, and my mother would have the lunches prepared. We'd have time to have lunch with her, and then walk back to school. It was great, great feeling.
Now you had how many brothers and sisters?
I have one great sister who's sort of like in charge still to this day.
That's good.
And then 3 brothers. And unfortunately, Bob passed away at a young age, and I felt cheated, but I know his presence is still with us. He was like the meat to the sandwich, the peacemaker.
Yeah. Well, I remember Uncle Bob. He was, whenever I think of joy, his face comes to mind.
Yeah.
Bald-headed, big smile, and
Yes.
tons of energy. He was the type of guy that would, when you'd set up the pictures, he'd set the timer and then run into the picture and look like...
You remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. I often remember, I'm not a good golfer. Okay, so once in a while I would pick up the clubs and get frustrated. But if I ever have a good shot, I realize it's because he helped me with that. I can see his smile, and my father, because those two were the golfers in the family.
So talk about your mom. What are some of the things as you think back at your mom growing up that were important for you, or that you remember some stories about her?
Her generosity and her hospitality and her faithfulness in prayer. She had a great devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. So it wasn't uncommon that when she was resting or before she went to bed, she had her rosaries in her hand. And in fact, they were always in her pocket. That was one thing that she got annoyed with, was the current trends is to not have pockets. And so she was like, this is not working for me. So, but no, she had a great prayer life, and very resilient. I mean, at an early age, she lost 2 siblings. She was one of 13. Her father was an orphan, and 2 of her uncles went off to become Benedictine monks. And maybe that's where she got the spirit of hospitality, because that's the Benedictine hospitality is their motto. So
talk about those great uncles. There were 3 of them. Did their parents die, and then 2 became priests in the Benedictine order?
I never really
orphanage?
got to meet my 2 great uncles, Callistus and Aurelius.
Yeah.
And their father was obviously my grandfather, Henry Michael Staley. And so, yes, the 2 of them went off. Well, all 3 of them actually went off to be raised by the Benedictines.
But they were left orphan, right?
Yes, they were. They were born in Butler and were shuffled into an orphanage that was run by the Benedictine nuns. And then when they reached a certain age, they were transferred to St. Vincent's, where they were nurtured, and 2 of them became priests. And obviously my grandfather married a wonderful woman who was from that area, who was at Seton Hill, and they had 13 children and adopted 2. 9 boys and 3 girls. And Uncle Tony was an extra. I never met the other child who they adopted.
Well, what was interesting too is that one became the first professor, or he started a school. The Pope asked him to become a director of a university in Peking, China. The other became the archabbot, right?
Right.
So these 3 boys left orphans. It's amazing the plan of God for the 3 of them.
Yes. And my grandfather raised beautifully these young kids, and they all had professions, and John was sort of assigned to become the priest to pay back.
That's funny.
Yes.
Yeah. It also frustrates me to think about the current laws of orphans and things, and where the laws are setting up in such a way that the way in which the church would want children to have an option of a mom and a dad, they're taking laws now to not do that anymore. And so both in the Supreme Court and in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania now, they're going to be trying to restrict orphanages to not allow those options of a heterosexual couple to adopt. And so it's something that hurts me, because it's going to put the Catholic Church in a position to no longer do one of the great services of orphanages, and then being able to offer these kids a mom and a dad.
I know.
So it's a real challenge that our community has today. You know,
it's not a profession that I would want to go into without my spouse, my husband, your father.
Yes.
I think to be a single mom or single father raising kids today, it takes two. It's a partnership. Yeah.
Speaking of that, talk about your dad. He was always somebody funny, and I remember he saved my life. I was praying about this the other day, of thinking, who were people who saved my life? We were headed towards a baseball game, coming down from the Green Tree Hill into Fort Pitt tunnels, and this guy hit us from the back. And this was before seatbelts, so I think this must have been the late 70s or something like that. And I went headlong, and I was about to go through the window, the windshield. And your dad was driving, and he stuck his hand out, and he cushioned the blow. And I'll forget, he got cut here. My head was fine. I just went back. I probably had a little whiplash, still recovering from that. But, he was quicker than anything, and he saved my life there, because we got hit from behind.
And you went on to the baseball game.
Oh, of course we went on to the baseball game.
I remember getting a phone call.
Okay.
I think because you didn't have cell phones.
No, right.
So I think I received a phone call from Three Rivers Stadium saying, we're okay, but you're going to have to call your insurance company, because he was driving my station wagon. But I honestly, I couldn't believe. I said, are you sure you should go on to the game? Oh yeah, we're fine. We're going to the game.
I'm glad we went to the game.
Yeah. That was my dad.
Oh, okay.
He's just, he had a great sense of humor. He had a great deal of compassion for people. His offices, he took over his father's photo engraving business, which is obsolete today. But it was on 2nd Avenue, which is now part of the correctional institutions along the river there in Pittsburgh. And so he had a favorite homeless guy that he would constantly make sure he had shoes and clothing. And I don't know if Dad ever knew his name. I don't remember his name, but he always did it very quietly. And he always treated people with great dignity. It was a beautiful example to me of everybody was a special person. And but he was always full of surprises.
Was he?
Oh, he kept my mother on her toes. Like one day, it was a typical Saturday, and all of a sudden a bulldozer was going down our driveway, and Mother looked at my father and said, Jim, what's that all about? And he said, oh, I forgot to tell you. We're going to build a pool in the backyard.
Like that's how she found out?
She found out we were having an in-ground pool, and that was it. Yeah.
So that's where I get that spirit of initiative and spontaneity. Just all of a sudden a bulldozer. So if a bulldozer comes...
Yes, it was quite a day. Poor Mom. Yeah. But that was his thing. He was very spontaneous.
Now, is it true that he used to take you also to go to confession in Bloomfield? And is that true?
Not Bloomfield.
Oh, okay. Where was it? This
near
is in
Holy
Italian.
Rosary.
Oh, Holy Rosary.
Yeah, the priests, they were.
There was an Italian priest.
Yes. It was Holy Week, and I wanted to get to confession, and I knew he said was going, so I said, "Can I go with you?" And he was hesitant, and then we got in the car, and so we drove quietly, and I went to confession, and I couldn't understand Father at all. He had such a thick Italian accent. I wasn't sure that he was speaking English to me.
Right.
So when I came out, I looked at Dad, and he said, "Don't you tell your mother. Don't you say a word to your mother." I was like, does it count?
So it was in Italian, right?
Oh,
you were doing English, he was in Italian.
Yes.
So. Oh, yeah, that's a great confession. That's a great way to put it. I love it.
Oh.
And so growing up in Point Breeze there, you also had a very interesting first confession experience. And the reason why I feel like it's important to talk about this is that as a priest, when I hear first confessions, it's one of the greatest things, Mom. I just love just being able to hear these little kids and then know that they come in and they know their sinfulness and they walk out with just the freedom. They you can see them skipping
floating
out. Yeah. And it's like all those little things that they stored up are gone. I tell them it's like a helium balloon. Just let it go.
Oh, beautiful.
It's like the song, Let It Go. It's like, why do you have to store this up in a cold ice castle when the Lord wants to melt your heart and just snuggle up with you now? And so let it go.
That's where we as adults should act like children.
Oh, well, let the children come to me is one of those scriptures that happens. So I feel like confession has evolved from back in your day and even before, when you hear these horror stories of the priests being very raw, rigid. And I can't help but to remember, like, my first confession, the curtain was open and we just sat on the lap of the priest. And it was so incredible to just experience God's mercy through the loving forgiveness of a priest. And it was just, I just thought, now where we are, obviously we have, the boundaries and all that, but it's just been like, for me, and I know all of us young priests, we all just want the first confession to be such a beautiful, memorable experience of God's mercy. But yours was not.
I had a wonderful, the Sisters of St. Joseph from Baden were our teachers, and they were marvelous. And Sister St. David was my first grade teacher. And I don't know, maybe she came into doing the second grade. She couldn't have, but anyhow, I just remember going to confession, and we were lined up by height, and I was definitely one of the smallest of the class. So yes, I went into confession. In those days, there was the screen that slide open, and so I began my confession, and dear Father said, "I can't hear you." So I thought, well, I projected a little louder. I don't really remember, but obviously I spoke so loud that Father got upset and said, "If you speak any louder, the whole church is going to hear you." And within a few seconds, the door opened and Father came out and looked at Sister and said, "Call me when you have this group ready and prepared."
Wow.
So I just didn't move.
Were you stunned?
Well, I was. I was like,
gosh.
geez. I don't really recall all the emotions. I just know that Sister opened the door and said, "Ann, come on out." And so our class was dismissed from confession that day. Wow. So we came back, and I believe it was our assistant pastor, Father Staub, who, God rest his soul, is no longer with us. He heard our confessions then. But Father, when I look back, our pastor was elderly, and probably, as a child, you don't know what they're facing, right?
Sure.
But I never look back at that. I mean, you've asked me to tell that story, but that does not affect. I really appreciate going to confession. And in fact, at Christmas time, we always put on a Christmas show. And I remember Sister asking me to go over and get Father for the show. And I was like, "Are you sure?" Because my three brothers were altar servers, and that didn't always go well. So I did. I went over and got Father, and he was so gentle. He was so different than the priest that was in the confessional that day. So, I think we have to always remember that our priests are human beings, and they face things that we have no idea about. Yeah. And I'm not just saying this because you're my son, and I know that you have to face difficult things, but I think we all need to look at our priests and pray for them and help raise them up, because lately it's not been easy to have the vocation of the priesthood. Yeah.
And you've always been connected to priests your whole life, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, like I can just, even when I see around Pittsburgh, so many of the priests here, and then the Benedictines, you just have always had a good relationship with priests.
My favorite is the Holy Chrism Mass. And this last 2 years with the virus, I just, it was such a sorrow for me not to be present. To me, that is the greatest witness, to see all of our priests going up to the altar and concelebrating together, and just the renewal of your vows. It's so beautiful.
Right. Yeah. And I think for me as a priest, that moment of the chrism is a chance for us to renew our love for God, for our priesthood, and for our people, and being able to be in our cathedral, which is the mother church. It's like where we get nurtured to then be able to go out to our assignments. It's just a very powerful experience. It's what kicked off this program last year when we couldn't be there. We got together as priests and talked about our story. And now this year we got to be as priests together once again with our bishop to be able to do that.
Well, I look forward to next year, because this virus is gone. In my mind, it's gone.
It's gone. So a lot of people have asked me questions and building up to this show about how you're able to balance the different hats, because you had to wear different hats as being part of this wonderful, great family that you and Dad have coordinated throughout all these years. So you had the hat of chauffeur, you had the hat of a cook, you had the hat of a cleaning person, you had the hat of a laundromat, you had the hat of a baseball coach, because you were my baseball coach for a while. You had the hat of trying to like put together all the house stuff. You had the hat of being an executive's wife, all these different hats. When you look back over these years, what would you say helped you be able to maintain a balance and faith and sanity through all these hats that you had to put on?
The partnership in faith with Jesus Christ, and having a role model like our Heavenly Mother. And also I had my mother as a great role model, and my dear mother-in-law today, 96, to look at those two and think, I can do this. It's doable. Plus, having a spouse like your father, who he would oftentimes come home and not even have his tie off, that he'd be out pitching wiffle balls and entertaining you so that I could do dinner and maybe help somebody with their homework. Because the balancing act is really difficult sometimes. And that's when I think we get upset, is when we can't fulfill everything. And the sooner we learn as women, we can't do it all. And that was a big hurdle for me. For the first number of years, I just thought I could do it myself. But it was a flaw in me that couldn't balance taking care of the children, taking care of the home, being a good wife, being whatever else it was. And so I really am so grateful that I didn't have to go outside the home and earn a living. My prayers go to women today who are trying to balance a career and family life, because somewhere, somehow, something is going to give in them, either their health, the relationships that they're trying to maintain. We are only human. And that's why I think the most important thing we can do is take time to pray and to ask the Lord and our Blessed Mother to give us that inspiration and confidence that whatever we have to do today, it's what He wanted us to do, not what I thought I should do. And so many times my hang up was order and structure. And so there were times where things should have been put aside. And I should have listened more to the children and to Chris, to your dad. So yeah, that's when it was the most difficult, when I felt the conflict tugging and feeling the social pulls to do things, when my most happiest times were being in the home.
What was the biggest jump for you? So you have 8 kids. Was it going from 0 to 1, 2 to 3, 4 to 5? Was there a moment where you think back and like, oh boy, I got to play zone defense now? Or, you talk about like you were limited. You can't do anything. You can't do everything. Was there a certain moment with us when you hit that and you're like, okay, I really have to like trust one of our babysitters more, or trust somebody to help you out?
Well, we have 2 hands.
Okay.
So when you came along, you were number 3.
I know.
And thank God you were easygoing.
Oh, say that again, Mom.
No, well, I will say that. Yeah, you were easygoing, but I was always annoyed when we'd go to like parking lots and they would not have anything for moms with children. And I remember one time I was really frustrated. I forget what it was, and I had one, maybe Mary Kay in an infant seat, and there was Dory, Jenny, you, and I was trying to keep you all shepherded together. And I remember, out of just defiance, I'm parking in handicap. So I went into the store and I came out and somebody yelled at me and said, "You're not handicapped." I said, "I'm not." So it was so great, because about a year later, I went back to that same store and now they have signs for parking for expected mothers. And I'm thinking, thank God they recognized that we need a little extra help here. Provide us a little closer parking spaces. Exactly. So that was like a victory for me.
You thought, yes.
Yeah. Yes, women are getting recognized. Small thing, but it was important.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if this is an old picture of us, but I'll try to put it up there like out of the thing there. A little bit like that. Anyway, that's all 8 of us plus the shepherd in there.
Yes.
So yes, that was our little German
I guess
shepherd
one
there.
of the hardest things for me is when I gave up being chauffeur.
Okay, talk about that.
Because when you were chauffeuring your children around to the various things, it was always peculiar to me how they thought there was like a glass window that went up and they could talk. I learned more about taking kids to their athletic events, what was going on in their lives, than when we came home and actually could have dinner together. Because the discussions that went on between your friends was open and very revealing. So that was the hardest thing for me, was to give up the needs of the kids on that realm. Because all of a sudden they're driving, they're off. God knows what they're doing, but you pray, you know, on your knees that they come back. We always had a curfew. There was a structure.
Right.
Yeah. So, and then as you come back and we're all adults, it's interesting what gets revealed to you. And you're sort of grateful you didn't know. Like, for example, I never knew you were sneaking in through the window of Pauline's room. And she would have nightmares. And I'd go in there and I'd say, Call, there's nobody in your room. Meanwhile, you were hiding under a bed. I only knew that afterwards. Like 2 years ago, I learned of this.
It was probably better. It definitely was better for me.
It was probably better.
Because if I came in late from curfew, my sister's window was in this back alley that you could climb a brick wall and get into that. And she would see me and I'd say, you're sleeping. And said, she was like, she's not sleeping. Then I would tell mom beforehand, I said, Colleen has this dream that she's just sleeping.
She would yell out, there's a man in my room.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Colleen, for doing that too. I have to admit, I didn't know that was going to be such a trauma for you. Talk about setting priorities in the household, though. So, like, what would be a daily routine for you and with their 8 kids? You would wake up. What would you try? How would you survive a normal day? Can you think of like a daily thing? What were some of the first things you'd do in the morning? What would you try to get done if the kids were off at school? And then how did you kind of conclude the day? Can you think of like a normal day in the life of you with all these kids?
Unfortunately, back then, I didn't have the priority of prayer.
Okay.
Because I was I'm very pragmatic, in case you don't notice. So probably one of my idiosyncrasies was 5 loads of wash, getting them completed, folded, and put back in everybody's
5 loads?
room. Oh, average, easy, 5 loads, easy. That's nothing.
Okay.
And then,
how did you sort the clothes?
Oh, because everybody's size is different.
Okay.
Yeah, we didn't have numbers on tags like you did when you went to camp and stuff.
Numbers.
Yeah, nothing like that. No, so that was always a goal for me. And then eventually I realized that it was okay to get help. Okay. And that was the best thing that ever happened.
So what did the help you with?
Helped with, like, when you're tired at the end of the day and someone has homework and you still have dinner and you still have to bathe the baby, or if you're nursing a baby, it's really, it causes anxiety. And I believe that the baby can experience that. So the most important thing I think that was good for me was that I was nursing. It forced me to sit down. It gave me an opportunity to pray, at least to have part of the rosary with me, or to at least read something. And sometimes it was great because if the youngest one would come and sit beside me. And so when that little one would come, I always tried to have books that were only used when we were nursing, so that wasn't like too familiar to them, that they still had an interest in it. So yeah, because they were still adjusting to this new little person coming into the family, and that person wasn't going away. They, temporarily you think, as I think they thought, well, this guy's going, he's not sticking around, but the baby stays. So you have to help that little one, who was the youngest before the next one, to adjust to that. And so you make that special time. But that's the hardest thing, I think, for moms, is to actually have quiet time and to make priority your prayer life. And that way you are asking the Lord, you're asking Mary throughout your day to fill the gaps, because we can't do it all. We can't be everything to everybody.
Part of your goal was, before you would leave in the morning, you get 5 loads of laundry done. How would you do that, plus getting the breakfast ready so the kids get to go off to school?
Well, the laundry was sort of spread out through the morning after I got them off to school. So breakfast was a priority.
Okay, how did you pull breakfast off?
I don't know. You do what you have to do. There's there's no science. Everybody had different likes, dislikes. And
so how would you treat that if somebody had a special like? Would you baby them with that, or did you just sometimes
try to? Didn't always work, but you try to accommodate. You have to remember, your mother-in-law, my mother-in-law, set a great precedence.
She had 13 kids.
Yes,
and did that inspire you?
Oh yes,
Like, I can do this.
Yes, but also watching my mother, like as I said, they both had the virtue of generosity. Unbelievable. Like when there was the fire at St. Vincent's in the prep, mother invited a number of the students that couldn't go back home to come live with us for a while. And that was amazing to watch the volume of food being prepared and consumed. It was like we should have had a cow, for the dairy products, for the meat. Yeah. So, and Grandma Donahue is just the same way. She's always got a volume of people coming in, and that hospitality of wanting to make sure you're fed and happy and warm. That's innate, I really believe, in us.
Well, it's the charism of the Benedictines as well. Saint Benedict in Christianity would grow and spread under that as one of their key characteristics of making them homemade bread and even serving them a beer and having that was part of what it means to be a Benedictine. So it's interesting that your lineage has that in it, from your. So you get the kids off, then what would happen? Would you go back to bed and just wait for the?
Are you kidding? No. Time goes so quickly.
Okay.
When the last one off to school, somebody asked me, "What are you going to do with all your free time?"
Right.
There was no sense of free time. It was sort of like you get your things done, you get to the grocery store, get your dinner plan going, and then before you know it, it was 3:00 or whatever, and the kids were coming home. One of the great things, though, was dinner hour, and just be able to listen to all the different stories, and then watch your dad engage in the latest, what would he call it, politics, or what's the latest argument at school? Yeah, he loved to draw that out. But he also was a great lunch maker.
He was a great
So
lunch
that was
maker.
a big ease for me, because by the time dinner was over and dishes were done, I was done. I mean, it was such a great feeling to know that you got everybody bathed and they were heading to bed. That was great when they were young to do.
Now,
that.
you used to also combine doing all this family work with different projects. I remember you took on the whole pornography movement, in Pittsburgh, and did that. And then you did a lot of work with some of the poor and some of the different housing developments. You worked with Young Life and things like that. How did you find time for those outlets, and why? What do you think drew you to be able to complement your life at home to go serve those who are in need?
I think I wanted to see if my brain was still functioning.
Yeah, that's a good thing, because we warped your brain a little bit.
I could, when we would go out socially and people would ask me, "What do you do?" That was always a tough question for me, because
what do you do?
What do you do? What do I do? Well, I could tell you I can change diapers in a matter of so many seconds. And so you begin to feel like your brain might be coming like pablum. So it was through Reed Carpenter.
Right. The Pittsburgh Leadership Foundation.
Yes. Yeah. And volunteering there. And that was a good thing for me. I think I did it maybe once or twice a week. And he gave me responsibilities that, was beyond me, but he had confidence. Like, we had an addiction program, so we were trying to figure out how to allocate the money for which programs. And yes, there was a pornography warehouse that was going to get started in our neighborhood in Mount Lebanon. And we learned that most townships don't have any laws to protect them from pornography warehouses. Now today, of course, they don't need that. Yeah. But it was $1 billion business back then in the early 90s. I can't imagine what it is now. But it was a worthwhile fight, because we helped little townships build ordinances to protect. In fact, in Mount Lebanon, that is now the post office.
Oh,
but that's where a gentleman from Ohio was going to come in and put a big warehouse.
When you think about getting a whole day accomplished, what would you look at as some of the proudest moments that you would look back on it? And obviously, falling asleep would probably be a great moment too. But when you look back at your days, how would you find joy and fulfillment in that? Because I think one of the challenges I feel like today is that many women are told you're not going to be fulfilled unless you're out being a CEO of this and the organizer of this, and then you're in charge of this board and that board. So, as a mom, where does fulfillment and joy come from?
Well, from, first of all, knowing that you've made your spouse happy, that you've put energy into being caring for him and knowing what was important to him, whether he had something great happen at the office, to hear that story, and then to have that same kind of openness and listening to your children and hearing what was the good of their day and sharing in that and having enthusiasm. And also to assist them in any projects that you might have had, whether it was to have a storyboard and to run out at the last minute to Office Depot and buy the cardboard and get that done. I mean, just all kinds of little things that are put for you. They're not big things, but they're big at the time for the child or for your spouse, to just be able to relax and to listen. Because I have a problem in focus. I don't know how many times your father will say to me, focus, Ian. So maybe if I were back in the 50s and they would diagnose me, I probably was ADD. So, I wasn't a great reader. So for me, it was just so exciting to be able to see all of you accomplish what your goals were, big or little.
I can remember I was playing baseball, and you had this great competitive spirit about you. Like, you wanted to see your children, as any parent would want to win, but you also would sometimes jump in and be hands-on. And so I was in this baseball season. Our team was horrible, and we had this one guy who every time the ball would be pitched, the poor guy would shy away. And my mom's a really good baseball player. She was definitely very athletic, still is, but we played tennis together. But anyway, I don't know how old I was, probably 7 or 8 years old. And our baseball coach walked off the field because he was so mad at us. He was so frustrated with us. And you were probably nursing one of the kids. And then you remember you just jumped in.
Well, the whole team was there. The parents had dropped your kids off.
Exactly.
So it was like, but you know what? There was another man there. He was a Presbyterian minister. And he and I looked at each other and said, okay, we've got all these kids there. The parents aren't coming back for an hour. So we had you take the field. And the next thing, he and I talked, and he told me his schedule. And I said, look, I'll be happy to be your assistant. And it worked. By the grace of God, it worked. And we had a lot of fun. But my goal was to get that little guy who was out in the outfield. You know how you pick up a weed and you blow? Yeah. That's what his goal was every time he went out in the outfield. Plus, when he came in to pitch, he was so afraid of the ball.
To hit when he would hit it. Yeah.
Yes.
And so what happened with him? Do you remember?
His father was very aggressive, and he would come and yell at him.
Oh.
So I talked to the ump one day before the game, and I said, look, this is what's going to happen. Can you help me with this, Dad? Because it doesn't work well for me to say anything. So he said, yes, I'll be happy to. So his little son got up and he swung the bat, and he didn't jump out of the batter's box. We had worked on staying close. So he hit the ball, but the dad got very aggressive, telling him to run, because he sort of was shocked that he hit the ball. So the father was pretty aggressive and yelling. And so the ump said, you are to sit in the bleachers. And if I hear you yell again, you're out of here.
The ump told the dad that?
Yes, he told him that. And he did listen to the ump. He never came and was trying to coach his son. And his son did really well. And we won.
Yeah, we ended up being champions that year. Everybody qualified for the playoffs, and then all of a sudden things
Well, they almost weren't going to give it to us.
Right.
Because I was a woman, and they never had a woman coach before. And unfortunately, the Presbyterian minister couldn't be there for the finals. And so they were going to try to, default because women weren't coaches then. But we won.
You won anyway.
Well, your dad said he was going to go to the paper.
He was going to do something to them. So as you think about your children and raising them, obviously Dory and I are consecrated to Jesus. I'm a priest and Dory's consecrated. Did you have any inkling that your children would become priests or religious? Was that ever a prayer of yours, or did you ever consider that when you were raising us?
I never looked and designed any of you in terms of what your vocation was going to be. I just always prayed for God's will to be done. Fiat. That was my motto. And actually, no, I never saw any of you as ordained or religious. In fact, when you entered, I'll never forget dear Father Bryce, who was pastor then at St. Bede's, said to me, Ann, it's beautiful that your son has gone off to give God the first chance, but don't see him a priest until his ordination. And I thought that was really good advice, because you wouldn't want anybody who has gone off to see if that's their vocation, if they come home and feel that they're a failure. Because what they've done is given God their first chance. So I always appreciated, and I always heard that what Father Bryce said to me.
Yeah. And so obviously Doreen are in that vocation, but your other children are married. What's it like to watch your children get married? Like, you remember any of the marriage ceremonies or just seeing them get married? It must be so amazing to see your children and they have amazing spouses. I have the best in-laws in the world. I can't imagine. We just had a first communion the other day, the DiCarlo girls, and then the Gornicks. It's just wonderful. What was it like for a mom to watch her children get married?
Well, first of all, there's the dating.
Yeah.
And I remember your sister Jenny when she was dating, sort of like two guys at the same time.
Right.
And I really prayed about that. I always pray for the spouses of children. I think that's important. And so Jenny was sort of gravitating there. And I don't know if she asked me, because she was the one who said to your father long ago, Dad, if I can't find a spouse, will you do a prearranged? You know, Dad had that.
Yeah, I think Dad revealed that the last time. That almost made him cry because he realized that my sister was probably going to need that, and he thought it was a joke, and then the joke kind of came back around. Anyway, she found a great spouse as well. So
she did.
It was God's timing. I think we were just a little worried about it.
It was a blessing, but for Dad, that first wedding was really difficult for him because he didn't come along the process, you know. Once Jenny realized that Will was made for her, he didn't go to any of the, designing of getting the gown and blah, blah, blah. Although Jenny really was, of all my brides, she was the most remote. I think her mother-in-law to be picked out the bridesmaids' dresses. Dory, who's consecrated, picked out her china pattern. And, so there she was. She was getting married, Sacred Heart. And Dad had never seen a bride before.
Oh, boy.
Oh, boy. Poor Jenny. I was already seated, right? The mother bride goes first. And all of a sudden, I look, and Dad is crying so hard. And Jenny tells me that on the way up, she didn't know what to do. She had never seen your father cry. So she was thinking about the Pens. The Pens had just done their draft. So she was like, okay, so who do the Pens going to end up with, and to try to shock her dad. I mean, she was holding him up. So that by the time he got to my pew, he was crying so hard. So it was tough to see your first go. So after that, I made a rule with them. You must come to at least 2 fittings to see the bride in her dress and anticipate that day. I think for me, it's a lot easier because I'm alongside them. Right. Going through the emotions and the preparation. It's sort of like, that day's over. It's like running a marathon.
It is a marathon, right?
It's exhausting.
So now, how many grandchildren do you have? And what's it like to be a mom and a grandmom? How would you compare those two experiences? So how many grandchildren are there now?
We have 40, but 39 in the arms.
So there's one who's...
Regina, yes. Yeah. God bless her. And... it's fun because you get to do things with them and you don't have any responsibility. It's great. It's too bad God didn't give us grandchildren first, as the saying goes. Because you make all your mistakes on your children. But it's beautiful to see them develop and be able to add sort of like the icing on the cake. Because the mom and dad had the big responsibility. And as a mom, grandmother, I have to learn to zip it up. And that's very difficult because you've gone through your life experiences and you've made your mistakes. And so your goal is not to have them repeated. But guess what? It's part of the pruning. Jesus talked about the pruning last Sunday in the gospel. So without that pruning, we're not going to bear fruit. And so, yes, as a grandmother, I enjoy them coming into the home. But I also enjoy saying goodnight to them because I know that they're really, I'm handing them off to their parents.
Now, when you think about your children and grandchildren, would you have changed anything that you did? Or are there things that you felt like God's grace allowed you to enjoy now that you see the grandchildren in this experience of being a grandma as opposed to a grandma as a mom?
Unfortunately, I think I have your mold, your cast is already molded. So one of my hangups is what? Structure and organization. Okay. So it's still a battle for me to learn to let the mess be the mess and enjoy your children because they're going to grow up so fast and the grandchildren grow up so fast. I mean, our oldest Annie is out of the house and practicing as a nurse. And we were so blessed to have her live with us for a few years before she went off. And so those moments of when they're little and impressionable are so quick. They're such a fleeting moment that it's really important to enjoy them. And it took a good friend of mine to come one day and sit on the floor and play with my children that made me realize she's come here to visit me, but she really didn't come to visit me. She's enjoying my children more than me.
Aww.
But it was a great awakening.
That would be a great awakening,
Yeah,
right?
that was a gift from God.
Now, as a grandmother, you also get to like hear your children and some of the struggles and things of parenting today. Do you think it's different to be a parent when we were growing up as opposed to today? And what are you feeling from that front? Because I know you're always a mom. You can't take that out of you.
I think it's more difficult today.
Do you?
I do, because you don't have as much influence on your children. I mean, we talked about peer pressure when you were growing up.
Right.
And we could control that. You would come home. But today, the social media, the access to the internet and communications with each other, their peers, it seems like it never ends. I had a friend who said that he wished that he could have a switch that would turn off the internet at the home at like 8 o'clock at night, because that way the family would have a better opportunity to communicate within itself, regroup from the outside evils that are so pernicious in our society today, and also to understand who they are. Because kids today don't get to know who they are. They're always receiving information about what they could be or where they should go. But when do they have time to really do any kind of reflection on who they are in God's plan?
Yeah, I've always felt that the most urgent, most fruitful, and the most important thing any human being can do is receive God, is receive Jesus, receive the Lord. And how can you receive if you're not aware of who you are and have the silence of that? Your dear friend Manfred Honeck, who I'd like to talk about right now with the symphony, I had him on the program, and he talked about living in the foothills of the Alps. And it was almost like he was a Sound of Music family, because his dear mom would die and his dad would, teach them music and then take them to Austria. But he said that it was in the silence of the Alps where he was able to receive the music from God, like to hear. And I think you're right. You get into the car today, at least what I've seen, is that there's the music on and there's the watching the TV and there's always these electronics, just the amount of screen time that kids have. Oh. And it's like, well, when are they going to just watch the fog roll in, or just be out in the rain with the raindrops, or watch a little grasshopper, or listen to a bird, or watch Mama Bird take, you know what I mean?
The simple things.
Do you feel that at all?
Yes. I do think that some of the teachers today are more sensitive to that.
They are, you're right.
One of our little grandchildren, Colette, was at St. Bede's, and the teacher brought in an incubator, and so the chickens hatched this week. And Colette was so excited, and she said, and the caterpillars exploded. So it's so beautiful. I think, I'm so grateful for teachers who realize that they have a vocation.
Yeah.
And I think that it's been a very difficult couple of months with, this virus and kids going hybrid and, all the different changes. They've had to be very flexible in their teaching and getting a message across.
You and Dad were so good at us with inspiring us to go to Mass. I remember we were doing First Communions now, and the weekend before my First Communion, the tabernacle at St. Bernard's was off to the left from the altar, and we would sit over there. And I asked you, Mom, what are all those guys huddled around? I thought it was like a football play that they were designing over there. And as you sat down from communion, you said, that's where Jesus is. And that always stuck with me. It was like, I don't know if you remember, and I'm sorry, the dear nuns and all those other people who taught me religion, they taught me anything really. But I always remember you saying that Jesus is there in the Eucharist, like he's there in the tabernacle, he's there. Did you and Dad have like a plan of teaching us like religion? Because you both took it as if it was your number one responsibility in terms of letting us grow up and inspiring us to want to go to heaven. And I'd have to brag about you here. It's obvious that all 8 of us are still plugged into the church. We're practicing Catholics. How did you and Dad, when you think back to it, inspire us to want a relationship with Jesus, to want to go to church, to even in college when we'd hit bad times and maybe some of us faded away, but we're all back in now, and it's just incredible to see that. How did you guys do that?
I think we had great role models.
Mm.
Both of our parents were deeply committed to their Catholic faith, and the value of parochial education, Catholic education, was of the utmost importance to us. And living in Mount Lebanon at that time, we were so grateful for St. Bernard's, because there were the Sisters of St. Joseph,
Right.
again from Baden.
From Baden, our backyard.
Yes, and our pastor, Father Wilt, at the time, had a deep commitment to Catholic education, to his school. And that makes a huge difference. I realize you have a lot of roles to play, but where you see a pastor who's devoted to his parochial school, he gets the message, he gets it, because the future of our church depends upon the education of our youth.
Right.
So for your father and I, we both grew up, Dad grew up at St. Philomena's, which was the Redemptress. Yep. We both had an overall positive experience being educated in a Catholic school. Now, that's not to say there weren't days where, it was a little crazy, but when I look back, it was a very positive, thriving environment for us. And so we wanted to share that with our children. So it was a natural feed-in. I'm not saying everybody's experience in parochial schools is great, but you got to have some take-home value.
No, I loved going to St. Bernard's. It was culture shock to leave that environment. I love going to Central Catholic. I couldn't agree with you more. But I think with that, you and Dad had your own conviction for the moral life of the faith, to going to Mass. I remember we go on vacations and you always would look for places to go to Mass. We were constantly inspired to really try to do that. Was that something you and Dad just prayed about, or was it just something that just came out naturally? Because I never felt like we were forced to live our faith. There was this freedom in it, and it wasn't like we were, I don't know how to phrase the question properly, but there was a balance between the freedom to grow in our faith, and at the same time, the joy and the challenge of doing that.
I can't speak for your dad, although
what's your experience then?
For me, it's a gift. Okay, it's a gift from the Holy Spirit. Right. As long as I can remember, I would dialogue with the Lord. I didn't make bargains with them. I wasn't say like, Lord, if you give me a pony, I'll do this. No. It was something that I look upon it as a gift. I always had a sense of his presence. Growing up as the fifth child, and there was a gap between me and my brother Bill, there was a lot of alone time for me. So I learned to develop an independence early on. And having the example of my mother and father, who loved the Lord and were practicing Catholics, and watching the challenges they had in raising us, because we are all very different, our personalities are all very different, and we had different challenges in our life. That was the core, was our faith and practicing it, and having that sense of his presence, and also our Blessed Mother's presence in our lives. Through any challenge. You could do anything. So
if you're a mother out there, you had recommended this book. It was called Focus Your Day. Is there something about that book that's what we started the prayer with, that, I love what you just said there. It's like, you were always felt surrounded by the presence of God, even from a little child. And I think that's probably why, even though you could have a crazy second grade first confession experience, you still trusted in God, because you already had a relationship with him. So it was more natural for you to do that. What book do you recommend for anybody looking to keep that focus?
Well, this is just a really brief moment that if you're really busy. For me, it has always amazed me how it's coincided with where I am spiritually. And it's like, wow, this is a big fruit coming down, and I'm sending this to you. So it's most of the time it's right on from where I am. So it's just like one of those moments, like the Holy Spirit strikes again. Just gets me where I.
So it's called Focus on Your Day by Father Kenneth Grabner.
Right.
I think he's at Notre Dame. Recommended book that has helped you.
It has. I don't even know how I came upon it. Well, the Holy Spirit. I may have picked it up on one of my retreats, because eventually, once your children got a little bit independent, I loved going on retreats, especially silent retreats.
And you have another book there that you recommended?
Well, this book is an interesting book, because this is my battle between being a Martha and a Mary.
Okay, talk about that.
Well, this book is written by a Christian woman who, one of her best stories is the story of God giving us our challenge, and he suits us for what we can deal with. And it's us on the way up, this gentleman has a wagon that God's asked him to take this rock to the top of the mountain. And every few moments, he gets stopped by somebody and saying, "Oh, I see you're carrying a rock up. Would you take my rock?" So eventually he gets 3/4 of the way up, and he's perspiring. It's hot. He's miserable. And he's yelling at God saying, "Why did you give me this to do? I can't do it." And the Lord said to him, "I didn't ask you to do what you're doing. I gave you one rock. You're the one who made it more difficult, not me." So oftentimes that is me. And that's, the whining part of Martha. I believe Martha gets a bad rap, but I get the whiningness. And so this is to have that balance between being pragmatic and being joyful. And that's a struggle for me, is having that balance of joy and getting done the practical things.
So what's the title again?
It's called Having a Mary Heart in a Martha World.
What a great title. And the title says it all.
Yeah.
One of the things that I like about Martha and Mary is that they formed a faith sharing group with Jesus. So it would be those two, Lazarus and Jesus, and they would just hang out at nights and share their faith. So that's why the Martha and Mary moment even happened, because Jesus was comfortable being around them. So there was obvious ways in which their natural love for Jesus and then the way they would share with their faith together that was so important. I remember in your 50th wedding anniversary, we're celebrating at St. Vincent's, and you and Dad was in the car with you. We just had all the grandchildren. One of the greatest moments of my life, getting to celebrate Mass there in right near this Carey Center, named after your dear brother. It was like everything was coming together. And I'm in the back of the car, and I ask you, what was one of the most important things you ever did in your marriage to get to the 50th and beyond? And you said, Tuesday morning adoration with your dear husband, my dad.
True. And that's a blessing. In fact, we need to add on another hour, I told him.
Oh, good.
But,
does he know that yet?
Yes.
Okay, Dad, you're going to get another hour of adoration. That's good. Good
in
fruit
fact,
of this.
that was the conversation this morning when we parted. But also doing the Liturgy of the Hours has become a very important part. But again, I can't say that would be something that a young couple would be able to do. But it is so powerful to have that time to pray together. And also, before we got to that level, at night, we have a deal that we have to say an Our Father, a Hail Mary, and a Glory Be before we fall asleep. Even when we're kind of like not getting along,
right?
You still have to break the ice. You might not get through the issue, but at least you can come together and unite yourself to Jesus Christ, just like Christ coming to the wedding feast and solving the bride and groom's problem with a shortage of wine.
Right. And it's like that harmony that's so necessary.
Yes.
Before we finish, just a quick, you work diligently with the Pittsburgh Symphony in probably one of the most challenging times because of COVID. They can't have live performance. What's it like to be with the Manfred Honecks and the Chris Woos and these tremendous world-class symphony players? Why are you involved in it, and what does that bring? Why do you love it?
Because when you hear their music, their gift that God gave them, and they put on a beautiful concert, it is so elevating. It takes you from the current environment you're in and transcends you. And you know that what they're doing is an expression of God's love for us. There's no explanation for the talent. Yes, they exercise it and they practice. But I practiced piano for years. I'm lucky I can play chopsticks. To me, that'll be heaven, that I'll be able to go up and play Beethoven.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I really appreciate you coming on for today. Happy Mother's Day, a couple days early. I just wanted to let everybody know, a little program note. I'll be interviewing Father Eugene Ritz. He is the postulator for the cause of my favorite saint of all time. He's still working on sainthood, the fullness, but Father Walter Shizik, he was a Jesuit who spent 23 years in the worst prison camps in Russia. He wrote a book called He Leadeth Me. That book leadeth me to a pathway towards the priesthood. So Father Eugene Ritz is the head of that. So we're talking about how somebody becomes a saint today, but most importantly, He leadeth me. This is an amazing book, a spiritual experience of this dear priest, his first year as a priesthood, being thrown into the worst prison camps and finding what now becomes my favorite scripture, which is the Good Shepherd motif. The relationship between Psalm 23 and John 10 has always been Jesus there, ready to lay down his life for me, and how he leads me towards that just tremendous love. So that's May 11th, 2 p.m. Father Eugene Ritz will be joining me for that. So I just pray that all moms can cherish their wonderful children, their husbands, and their vocations, and that we can really, in this month of May, consecrate our moms to Mary. And so we pray, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.